I can always have really high work ethic. I can always have a great attitude, and I can always do my best to focus and concentrate in the moment. And when I started focusing on the process, I started realizing I was a lot more powerful than what I thought I was capable of. And when I was a freshman and I got voted captain, which is quite abnormal, I got voted captain because I led by example, not because I was the loudest and I scored all the goals. I worked my butt off, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I thought, you know what? No one's gonna outwork me. And I'm gonna be coachable, and I'm gonna take all the information that I can, and I'm gonna get better and learn and grow. And when I started doing that, I started feeling like, whoa, actually, I can do great things. And my narrative shifted because I was in control of it instead of it controlling me.
Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I am your host and coach, Tyler Johnson. And whether you've tuned in to elevate your mindset, your game, or just your day, you are in the right place. My guest this episode is a former professional soccer player, an author, a thought leader, mental performance coach, and a room tilter with limitless minds. Please welcome to the Elev8 podcast, Elle Nelson.
Hi, Tyler. I am fantastic. Really happy to be here and happy to be with you. Thanks for having me.
It is wonderful to have you tuning in from across the ocean, correct?
Yes, I am. I'm over in London, England.
Excellent.
Don't sound like it with the accent, but that is where I am.
Right. They weren't expecting that. First, I guess for our listeners to help us get to know you a little bit, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and then what led you into the work of being a mental performance coach?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm from Montana, very, very different than London. And for me, sport was a really big part of my childhood. So I grew up playing soccer. That was my main sport. And then I kind of dabbled in all other sports. And as I got into high school, I had a lot of people, family, friends, coaches tell me that I had so much potential, but I noticed that I wasn't able to perform consistently. And so I struggled with my confidence, performing under pressure. I was always comparing myself to my teammates and my opponents. And I didn't really understand why I couldn't perform consistently at my best. I just knew that some days I was on and some days I wasn't on. And I was fortunate enough to go and play in college on a scholarship for soccer, and I ended up running track as well. And when I got to college, I took a class called sports psychology, and it completely changed my life personally and professionally, because I realized that the greatest athletes train their brain just as much as they train their body. And that was the piece that I was missing. So I was my own first client. I practiced on myself like every single day, and it made a world of difference. I was a 4-year captain on my team, ended up running track, and I became a captain on the track team as well. And I attribute all of that to the mental game. From there, I was able to go and play in France, and then I was able to go and play in England. I really think that what I thought were my greatest weaknesses became my greatest strengths because of my mental game. And I became that passionate about it that I thought, I want to help other athletes do this as well, but at an earlier age than I did, because what difference could it have made then? So that's a little bit about my kind of professional career in sport, but then also how I got into sports psychology.
If you don't mind, what were a few of those things that in your self-experimentation first clientele process that were weaknesses that you, like you said, felt like they became really strengths of yours? What can you share some of those?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, nobody's asked me this question, so this is great. I told myself a lot of stories that I started to believe were true. So I created this narrative around how everybody was better than me. I wasn't good enough. I would never be that good. I had this negative self-talk that was so consistent that I wasn't aware of. And I was creating these stories that I started believing over time. And then when I learned about sports psychology, I started paying attention to the way I spoke about myself and the way I spoke to myself. And I realized how powerful those stories are. But then I also realized that I could take control of that narrative. And I was never that person. So I didn't need to act like I was that person. And I spent a lot of time rewriting those narratives. And that was probably the biggest thing I learned early on. There's a lot that went into that, but that was the biggest thing.
Yeah, I love that you brought up the aspect of stories. I think it's so powerful. And I think, especially young athletes, we get in our society also a lot of stories told to us, and
Mm,
we, this is what the story should be. This is what the story
yeah.
should look like. Um,
Hmm.
and it's hard to kind of, yeah, navigate our own stories when there's so much bombardment. What are ways that we can kind of some metaphorically, take control of that pen sometimes of our story?
Yeah. Do you know what, Tyler? You brought up a really good point. And I think the younger generation, like those that are listening that are in middle school and high school, and any parents or coaches that, have children or teach children in that particular age group, I know I've heard people talk about on your podcast too. Like social media is powerful. Like we're constantly comparing ourselves to other people because we see the best of other people. We see what they want the world to see. And it's very, very easy to compare ourselves. So that's one component. And then another component is that we're constantly being praised for outcomes. Oh, you scored that goal. Or, what's the first question that a lot of parents ask after a game? Did you win? Or what was the score? And so there's a lot of promotion around the outcome and not necessarily the process. And I was judging myself on the outcome. Now, for those that know anything about soccer, I was a defender. And so I was not the one out there scoring goals and getting all this glory. I was the one trying to stop them. And I'm human. And so, mistakes are made, things happen, teams concede goals. And I would attach my self worth to the outcome all the time. And that really fueled the narrative that I was telling myself. So for me, when I was trying to challenge this narrative and this negative way of thinking, I started thinking about, okay, what's in my control? So controlling the controllables. If I can't control it, I can't put energy towards it. And when I think about what I can control, I can always control, I call it like ACE, ACE. So this is a good way to remember it: attitude, concentration, and effort, ACE. Those three things are always in your control. So even if I feel like I'm having an off day and maybe my first touch or my passing isn't as accurate as I want it to be, I can always have really high work ethic. I can always have a great attitude, and I can always do my best to focus and concentrate in the moment. And when I started focusing on the process, I started realizing I was a lot more powerful than what I thought I was capable of.
Yeah.
And when I was a freshman and I got voted captain, which is quite abnormal, I
Yeah.
got voted captain because I led by example, not because I was the loudest and I scored all the goals. I worked my butt off, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I thought, you know what? No one's going to outwork me. And I'm going to be coachable, and I'm going to take all the information that I can, and I'm going to get better and learn and grow. And when I started doing that, I started feeling like, whoa, actually, I can do great things. And my narrative shifted because
Yeah.
I was in control of it instead of it controlling me.
Being a captain of any team as a freshman, don't think I've heard that on this podcast yet. Don't hear it a lot. Um, Even I think the dynamic of those that are upperclassmen that get put into that role, elected or otherwise by their teams, usually typically feel that have been asked or put into this leadership position. Now what? And sometimes the coaches aren't,
Mm,
especially in high school. You get elected captain, but um,
mhm.
and they're like, "Can you help us lead?" And the kid, "Yeah, I'm trying." And um,
Yeah.
did you feel that as being a freshman of yeah, you're doing and modeling the right things, which is you had the leverage to speak up and I think lead. But did you feel any of that as well, like additional leadership pressure, being that yeah, you just don't get freshman captains on too often.
Yeah.
Like and upperclassmen struggle with this, right? Like
Yeah, completely. And I think this goes into performance anxiety in some respect, but I definitely felt a lot of pressure my freshman year. And at first, if you were to watch my performances the first couple weeks after I was named captain, my performances looked like they just crumbled. Like that was a huge learning curve for me because then I started questioning, oh my gosh, that was a huge mistake. I bet they wish they could take that back right now. I'm playing terrible. So I started to slip back into some of those patterns of narratives and negative ways of thinking about myself. And I remember having a conversation with the older captain, and she spoke with me and she said, "Do you know there's not one type of leader. There are different types of leaders, and oftentimes we think the leader is the person that is the loudest and they're telling everybody what to do or to be accountable, and they're more vocal and have more of a presence." Now, for me as a freshman, I was a little bit quieter and I was shy and I was still trying to find my place. And I felt pressure, but I realized I was actually putting more pressure on myself than anybody else because of what I thought I was supposed to look like as a leader.
yeah,
But then, and this is something I work with teams and leaders on teams, is we have to let go of the expectation of what a leader is supposed to look like, and we have to be an authentic leader with our own super strengths, because my super strengths might be different from yours, Tyler, if we're on the same team. I led by example, and I was a really hard worker, and I was empathetic, and I was a listener, and I loved connecting with people one to one. So I wasn't this loud, proud, get the whole group together, rah rah, but I was going to outwork anybody that I could. And if you were struggling, I'm going to be right by your side, walking with you, helping as best I can. And when I accepted that that can be what a leader looks like, I that pressure looked and felt different.
yeah,
It felt
super,
again in my control because
yeah,
I wasn't trying to be someone that I wasn't.
yeah. And I think that's I mean, I know I struggled with that as a teenager, let alone in the pressures of sport and those kind of things.
Yeah.
And so that second part you said was really beautifully put, about being alongside someone. And talk about that with the dynamics of a team and in leadership.
Mm.
I think that's, especially feeling included, feeling you belong, whether you're a freshman
Mhm.
captain with these older people or you're just a new team member. Um,
Mhm.
what are ways, within a team dynamic we can make people feel that our team is alongside them and we'll be there for them?
That's a great question. I feel like so when I work with teams, we often think about, again, like the performance and how do we get them to play their best and gel as a team. And in my experience, one of the best things that you can do with a team is get them to understand each other as human beings, not just as players. Like if you're a football player, guess what? You're not just a football player, you're a person and you've got a family and you might have other stuff you're doing in your life. And it's really important and it's actually beneficial for performance that we recognize that you're not just an athlete. And so in preseason, what I spend a lot of time doing and what I'm doing right now with the team I'm working with is getting them to build relationships, getting them to be uncomfortable, getting them to be vulnerable, and helping them understand how much that affects performance, because it does. Because then they start to see each other as humans and they become more empathetic. Like if one of my teammates explodes on the pitch because she made a mistake and now all of a sudden she's yapping at other people, and if I start having to go at her, all of a sudden that can change the dynamic on the pitch. But actually, she's not normally like that. if I know her and I've got a relationship with her, I might understand she's got things going on in her life that need to be taken into account, but she's not feeling understood. And if she feels understood, solutions can be found, and then we can play together as a team. And I'm not sure if I, explain that smoothly, but understanding each other as human beings
Yeah.
helps you connect on the pitch and feel like you can walk, or the court, and feel like you can walk side by side with each other.
I don't think there's a perfect answer to that, right? Just like if we're all authentically ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And so um, you talked about doing that preseason work and getting them vulnerable. I
Hmm.
now knowing, your connections with the Limitless Minds, I have an idea of ways you might get them vulnerable. I know listeners that have had me work with their teams probably played Yes and or some other game that Travis has taught me or Josh.
Hmm.
Um, but talk about that because I think that especially I think in a lot of environments when we talk like, oh, this human connection, what do we do and be vulnerable? There's a lot of fun ways we can do that. It doesn't have to be something heavy to start with. There's a lot
Hmm.
of fun, playful ways that we can step into vulnerability and
Yeah,
step into that humanness. Can you share some of those things that you want people to experience to foster that connection?
sure. Oh, you know what? That is a really good question. Um, some of the things that we do, I mean, just little activities. So for for coaches, these might be some small things that you can add in. Um, to encourage players to be on time. The last person who's out, in the team huddle, let's say before practice starts or before the warm up starts, the last two people on the team that I'm currently with do like a karaoke together, or they have to do a dance together or something like that. And they can choose, they're somewhat comfortable, but most people don't really like that feeling. And all of a sudden they're a little bit more vulnerable in a different way. But then the whole team will create like a beat for them. So it helps them feel comfortable because they're
Yeah.
on it together. So something like that to where it's light and fun. Um, this season, well, last season when I was working with a team, we did kind of like yes and a lot of improv comedy that you can throw into it. But something that we did was I would show a picture of an image on the screen, and all of a sudden, that group, a small group of like five, would have just a couple minutes and they would have to come up with a pitch of how they were going to sell this random object to the group. So it's just encouraging them to get out of their comfort zone. Public speaking, even though we're used to performing on whatever stage we perform on,
Yeah.
public speaking can feel different. um, so I've got a lot of different activities like that. And then activities as well where they actually open up and they're communicating more about themselves or partnering up and learning more about each other.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I,
those are a couple.
listening to you, I was always pretty early type of athlete, like on time, but I can already see myself I think in college I was late twice, I think, to anything, right? And the second time I was a senior and my coach was basically like, let everyone go. I'll tell them you're going to run, but once everyone goes
Hmm.
away, like, shame on you. Wasn't going to really
Hmm.
punish me. But if I had to sing karaoke, like if that, like I would,
Yeah.
because if you just make me run for punishment, you're just going to see me run fast. And like that didn't get me out of
Hmm.
my comfort zone. I'm used to that. Right. That
Yeah.
didn't really teach me much. It's like, okay, run. You know, I like so many dynamics of that because yeah, you would see an authentic Tyler that you don't get, I think, and it would step out. And I would probably already be thinking as I'm running late, like, oh shoot, what song am I gonna do? What dance am I gonna do?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you're like, all right, like this is my time. Like I gotta do this, right? Like, so I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some good times and great connections coming from that. Um,
Yeah.
piggybacking some of our improv and limitless minds, there's a game we like to play on this podcast when we have a guest that is familiar with several other past guests. And it's a pretty simple, nice game. So, but I'm going to mention some of your colleagues there, and um, just want to hear one word that you would throw out as either comes to mind or as a descriptor of them.
Okay.
Fair? Sound good?
Yes, absolutely.
All right.
Let's do it.
Um, Joshua Lifrak.
I feel like for each room tilter, I could definitely say energy, but Josh is like pure energy.
Energy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. His clip from my episode, he talks about the wind and he like makes the wind energy come alive. So like I love that.
Oh, I
Um
believe it.
Travis
Oh,
Thomas.
yes. Warm.
It's great.
Yeah.
Henna.
Spunky.
Mm, spunky.
Hmm.
And
In the best
awkward.
way possible. In the
Yeah.
best way
In
possible.
all the awkward ways
I was gonna
possible.
say awkward, but I
But
feel
yeah,
like that's
yeah,
what
yeah. Tune into that
I think.
episode. We want to spoil her book, right? Like
Subconsciously, my brain was like, "Oh, we've got to find a synonym."
no, yeah, no, that was great. And then one of our early and repeated guests, Colin Henderson.
Oh, Colin. Do you know what? For those who know Colin, swag. I would say swag.
And if you don't know Colin, tune into those episodes and you'll
If
you'll
you don't know
understand it.
Colin, you should tune in because you're missing out.
Yeah, no, his be where your feet are photos. He's always got his foot swag going too. So love all
Yes.
those answers. Love all those answers. And kind of tangenting that into, one of those ideas. I don't think we've really discussed it a lot on this podcast for a while, but talk about neutral thinking and share with,
Mm.
how what that is. I think we always hear, positive, negative, these very,
Mhm.
again, the stories we get told and the stories that get thrown
Mhm.
at us. It has to be this or has to be that.
Yeah.
Share with our audience a little bit of intro to neutral thinking and how it can help us navigate our adversity.
Yeah, absolutely. When I work with athletes, something that I say, and coaches, when I work with them, they'll probably hear me say this fairly on or fairly early on. And that is that I'm not the biggest fan of somebody who's like, just think positive, just be positive, just think positive. I think there's a time and a place for it, definitely. But I'm going to put it this way. So if you think of a moment during sport and let's say your team is losing and there's not much time left and you just had a player that got taken off for a foul or a penalty of some kind, fouled out. In that moment, if your teammate is like, just be positive, how are you going to feel? Like, Tyler, how are you going to feel in that moment if you put yourself in that situation?
There's yeah, myself, I usually be like, there'd be a little bit of spite and anger, and I think that would come from you're not empathizing what I just went through. Right?
Yeah, I think
I
that's a
think,
great
right, you're
point.
not like yeah, I wanted to be positive, but it just didn't go that way.
Right.
So when you're throwing that back at them, yeah, I think yeah, that's, I think sometimes it gets lumped into that can be kind of a toxic positivity and I think that
Yeah.
toxicity comes from the gap of empathy.
Yes. Okay. I completely agree with you. And for some of us, that positivity might feel really helpful, but I think for most of us in that situation, we'd be like, yeah, well, the situation's not feeling all that positive right now. And again, you're not taking into account the circumstances and how I'm feeling. So, neutral thinking is us acknowledging that situation and going, hey, maybe it's not all that positive, but the point here is that we want to reduce the negativity. Because negativity, if we think about negative thoughts, they are 7 to 10 times more powerful than positive thoughts. So if you are in that situation and you've got one negative thought, you better say 7 to 10 positive things just to get yourself back to baseline. That's a lot. So is the purpose we need to cram some positivity up there, or do we need to reduce the negativity? If we think about what's more powerful, if the late and great Trevor Moawad, he had a great example, which was like if you're running a marathon and you've got two groups on either side, you've got one group that's boo, boo, and you got the other group that's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Hey, that's a lot of noise going on. And when you're trying to perform at your best, sometimes noise isn't that helpful. Because if we think back to the times when we've played our best, oftentimes we don't even know what we were thinking. It's like we weren't thinking at all. We were just in the flow state. We were just flowing. So, really, if we want to hear the clapping, we don't have to do more clapping. That gets
Take,
even louder in your mind. But if we reduce that negativity and the
Mhm.
booing goes down, all of a sudden, that clapping was there all along. We didn't need to cram it. So the idea of neutral thinking is acknowledging, hey, this is the situation. I'm looking at the facts for what it is in the present moment, which is, hey, we're losing right now. This is the score. This is how much time we have left. My teammate just got taken out, but we still have this much time left on the clock. How would I like to move forward? What's going to be the best way for me to move forward? I'm reducing negativity. I'm focusing on the facts.
Yeah.
Baseline, I'm neutral, which oftentimes is the best place for us to take the best next step forward.
Yeah. I like, thank you for bringing up Trevor, also a early guest in this podcast. Um,
Mm.
and I always love I just feel like you can even share it better, but the analogy he would use about a stick shift sometimes. Like when we're going, feels like we're going backwards, we don't just, we can you share that analogy a little bit?
Oh,
Am I
you
putting you
know
on the
what?
spot?
You can probably share it better than I could.
Uh,
I'm gonna be totally honest
maybe.
with you and everybody who's listening in. My dad tried to teach me to drive a stick shift. One day, I ruined the transmission, and he said, "You're driving in automatic."
um, that's probably a good, like, well, then I was going to ask, like, yeah, you're over in the UK. Are you driving on the other side? I don't know those different dynamics that you're working with, but I think, yeah, that to the point of Trevor's analogy, if we feel like we're going, it is his analogy is around a manual or an
Mhm.
automatic, not a manual too. So it's like, yeah, if we feel like things are slipping and going backwards in the wrong direction, we don't just, yeah, like you said, well, let's go forward with positivity and shove it forward.
Mhm.
You have to pass through neutral anyway to get to that.
Mhm.
And same thing, if you have to go backwards to reposition, you got to get through neutral to get a new,
Mhm.
to redirect your car. And so
Yeah.
I like car analogies for those that are learning to drive, those teenage years,
I
make the
hope you're
lessons
learning
stick.
better than I did.
I did not drive a stick very well. I did not learn
Yeah.
until later in life either. So I
No.
empathy there. Um,
It's such a good point though, and I do love the stick shift analogy because I work with so many professional athletes, and this came all throughout their childhood. So when they were in high school or went through an academy, they didn't learn how to channel their emotions. And so their emotions would get brought out. And sport is emotional. When you care about what you do, you're competitive. I hope you get emotional. You're going to have times when that emotion boils a little bit too far, and you might be angry, you might be upset, you might be frustrated, disappointed.
yeah,
And if that is dictating your performance and your performance is like this because your emotions are like this, you're not going to play consistently. And so getting to neutral means you acknowledge, hey, I've got these emotions, but they're not going to be in control. I'm going to look at the facts. And looking at the facts, getting to neutral, reducing the negativity, even though the situation feels rough, allows me to take the next best step forward where I'm in control again. The emotions don't control me. I control them and I can use them, but only if I shift through neutral first.
yeah.
So you're spot on.
Um, One other thing I wanted to touch on, I know you've written some articles, I think, on parenting. And I think from listening to something, your dad was an avid sports guy. Yeah. Um,
Yes.
and is there a dynamic that that came into play? Was it a situation? Did you feel pressure from your parents when in the conversation we started earlier about when you were young?
Yeah, I think, I mean, my dad was and is my anchor, and he played hockey at a very competitive level. And he's somebody who's very intense that he wants to win. And I think when I started playing, he was living vicariously through me, and he still would if he could if I was playing. Um, but he was always pushing me to be better and do my best. And there were times when that felt like a lot of pressure, and it created a little bit of friction between us. And it kind of got to the point where, not just for that reason, there were other reasons as well. I was feeling a lot of pressure. I didn't know this mental side of the game yet. And so my junior year in high school, I quit. And that's a big recruiting year when you're a high school
Yeah.
athlete. And I quit and I walked away because I was like, this is not fun. I don't want to do this anymore. This is too much pressure. I don't like this. And so I stepped away, and then I chose to come back my senior year. And if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have taken control over my kind of destiny.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
Um, yeah, and I think, every situation, especially as a sports parent, and it is unique and different. I
yeah,
think the commonality is it's challenging for our teenagers and kids
yeah,
to really hard. And again, like their cognitive function, they're just developing, they're growing, they're getting
mhm,
challenges thrown at them.
mhm,
What advice, any parents or coach parents listening, would you give to parents, those that are looking for, they want
mhm.
their well-intentioned, like most of the parents I know,
Yeah, of
um,
course.
and but want their kids to thrive and they want to push them and do their best. Um,
Sure.
is there any advice that you'd give?
Yeah. Do you know what? There's an activity that I do sometimes when I'm working with younger athletes and their parents. And I don't think I've spoken about this before. So it's called goal alignment. And what I would do is, I've got like a form that I've created, but anybody can do this at home as well. So if you write down kind of any reason why any individual, but in particular a youth athlete, might be competing in sport. So that could be just because it's fun. For the social aspect, they get to be around their friends, because they like developing and like their coach, because they want to make their coach happy or make their parents happy, because they want to play in college and they've got goals to do that or to play professionally and beyond. So, kind of writing out a long list of all the potential reasons why. And then what I would do is I would ask the athlete to fill that out and to rank themselves, like as to what's the most important and the least important. This is the number one reason why I play, second, third, fourth, fifth, all the way through however many you've listed out. And then that same exact list I would give to the parents. And I would say, I want you to think about the reasons why you want your child to compete in sport, and order them from one to eight, nine, however many there are. And then after that, I would ask them to meet. And now they've not seen the answers that the others written down. They would give them back to me if I was working with them, and I would get to see the similarities, maybe some of the discrepancies. And then if they just did it on their own, or if anybody's listening and wants to try this on their own, you could then come together and share answers. And it's a really good way to see, okay, where is their alignment and where might there be some misalignment? And that can be an amazing conversation starter. So, some of the questions that I ask are, okay, where is there currently alignment? And how can you, as parents, support your child with this particular priority as to why they compete? And if there's misalignment, how might you support them if that's the case? What changes might you need to make to better support them?
Yeah.
Or what do you need to understand and then talk about? And that can be a really good starting point to just get everybody on the same page. Because sometimes when there's friction, it's because there's misalignment, but we don't know it and we aren't having those conversations.
Yeah.
So it kind of brings it to the surface.
Yeah. Um, Two more questions I wanted to get to. I know I
Yeah.
brought it up. I wanted, um, you, I read part of the article that you had wrote about skill transference from sports into the real world. And
Mhm.
um, reflecting my own experiences and reading it and experiences of seeing teenagers these days, um, one of the things that came up was I think the skills that we wanted sports and what they did kind of instill have only expanded and become more valuable in today's day and age. And I think one of the other things, and this is what I wanted to hear kind of your input or commentary on was especially the side when it comes to being able to communicate, being able to understand, being able to be empathetic, these
Mhm.
human skills that I think
Mhm.
early on sometimes where, yeah, we know now that labeling them as soft, these are performance drivers, not soft things.
Mhm.
But a lot of times when my experience in sport was the things you're going to take away are the determination and the effort and the grittiness and yeah,
Mhm.
all those things too. But I think in
Yeah.
today's modern world, when you're going to look to hire an employee, I think these other things that we're going to get through team and sports right now are going to
Yeah.
really be not only performance drivers, but eventually economic drivers when they're professionals. What
Yeah.
do you? Sorry, I just threw a bunch of stuff, but I wanted to hear
No, I
hear
love
your
it.
thoughts.
I absolutely love it, and I couldn't agree more. And this is the whole idea of your experience in sport is not just giving you skills that are helpful in your sport, they are giving you life skills. No matter what age you're at, the longer you stay in sport, the more you have an opportunity to refine these incredibly valuable skills that employers are looking for. And I think now in this day and age, we see less human interaction as well. So these skills are even more valuable because sometimes they're a little bit more rare. So, I mean, this is relevant. I'll talk about it in relation to like the Olympics right now.
Yeah,
You've got people who are competing at the Olympics, and oftentimes when they're retiring out of their sport, and I did some work with Olympians who are retiring, so that's why I'm sharing this. They've committed their life to being able to go to the Olympics and compete. Now, unless an athlete gets gold or silver, maybe bronze, are we often able to remember their name? Especially, let's say the last Olympics. Do we remember most of their names? Unless it's a sport that we're crazy about, more than likely we don't. And so these athletes are coming out, and when they retire, they don't have a lot of work experience because they've committed their life to sport. So maybe if they've done a degree alongside competing, they've got that, which is great to have. Uh, but then when they get out, they're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm at a disadvantage. I have to now find work because oftentimes Olympians, they're not making enough to retire unless they're the really, really well known ones with all the sponsors and the media deals. So I don't have any work experience. I barely have any qualifications. I'm, whatever age, maybe mid 20s, give or take. So I'm competing against people who have all this work experience, and they don't always understand that the experience they've had from being an athlete is it's even bigger than that. And
yeah,
employers are actively looking for that because they can teach you the skills required for the job. They can help you get the certification, but can they teach you what it means to work as part of a team, to be able to communicate in a situation that feels like conflict and give and receive feedback? Can they teach you how you can perform under pressure and during crunch time and when it counts? There are so many skills that you're learning through sport in terms of how you interact with the world, how you regulate your emotions, how you communicate, how you're coachable, how you can be a leader, and many, many more. You are learning that all through your sport experience, even at a young age.
sure.
And that is huge. It's huge. But athletes don't always realize that.
Yeah. And the purpose of that article was the advantages that we can take from sport
Mhm.
and these skill transference. So, last question, one we love to ask our guests is little time travel, put you in a time machine, going back to see teenage self, 16, 17 years old. So yeah, that junior, right before that junior year kind of time. Um, If you could tell yourself or whisper into your ear something to your teenage self that you've learned along your journey, what would you want to tell yourself?
Oh, Tyler, that's a great question. If I were to go back and speak to my teenage self, thinking about the place I was in high school, I would say be courageous and bet on yourself. Yeah, that's exactly what I would say.
Love it. Well, thank you for joining the podcast. This was great. Appreciate your wisdom and sharing. That's awesome.
Tyler, thank you so much for having me. This has been so much fun and an absolute pleasure.